Welcome to this first dialogue of the 5-day series OECD-WWF Driving a Green and Resilient Recovery. We are very happy to have you all. Let me introduce myself. I am Manuel Pulgar-Vidal, Climate and Energy Global Practice Leader with WWF International and former Minister of the Environment of Peru and President of COP20 in 2014. We are very happy that we have joined efforts, WWF and OECD, to organize this kind of dialogue, in which we are trying to address what it is called the recovery. How can we green the recovery? In a time in which we are still facing the pandemic, in a time in which we know what it could be the consequences, mostly economic consequences, we are making all of our efforts to greening the recovery package, the fiscal stimulus package. So that is why in this 3 series of dialogue, we are going to first today address how much NDCs could help us to green the recovery. In the next one, on the day on the environment, we will address nature-based solutions as a potential tool to greening the recovery. And finally, a week after that, we will talk how can we unleash financial tools to help us in that effort. So for today, let me first introduce Masamichi Kono, Deputy Secretary General of OECD, for our opening remarks. So Masamichi, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Very well.
Oh, yes. A very good afternoon, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the OECD, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first of a series of 3 joint WWF-OECD high-level dialogues aimed at informing decision-making on how we recover from the COVID-19 crisis and how we can make our economies and societies more sustainable and resilient than before. And of course, I should also mention that we have been really thrilled by the excellent collaboration with the WWF, and this is another milestone in this collaboration. So thank you very much for creating this opportunity. The current health emergency and its economic and social ramifications have revealed how vulnerable we are to shocks that can be anticipated, but for which we have not adequately prepared. And I think we have to admit that. So the crisis was really a wake-up call that it is impossible to keep issues in the various domains of economics, health, environment, education, social justice, those different areas treated as separate questions with separate answers. As we focus on overcoming COVID-19, we should not forget that other planetary emergencies, starting with climate change and biodiversity loss, have not gone away. We may have perhaps forgotten about it for the time being, but they have not gone away. They will come back, if I may also say, with a vengeance. So if we leave those things unchecked, those global challenges that could have huge human and economic impacts, which may far surpass actually the effects of COVID-19. Then, of course, the most vulnerable groups and communities will suffer the most. So it's evident that low-income households are more vulnerable to air pollution and more broadly climate change impacts. And for example, the health threat of COVID-19 is greater for cities and people exposed to higher levels of pollution, which are most often people living in poor areas. And globally, 2.2 billion people lack access to safely managed drinking water. So imagine, of course, with COVID-19, this really makes it dire for those people lacking water. And we know that access to clean water and sanitation services are key to reducing transmission of infectious diseases. I mean, this is as simple as that. As governments start to move from short-term emergency measures towards longer-term economic recovery, people will also consider upgrading their climate commitments, that is governments, in the form of NDCs. This is required ahead of COP26, which has been postponed, but it will be coming soon. This presents an opportunity, therefore, to ensure that increased climate ambition is at the core of people-centered economic recovery strategies, as you just mentioned, Chairman. So economic recovery measures should be designed to both reduce the likelihood of future shocks and increase the resilience of economies and societies to those that will inevitably occur, while at the same time focusing on the needs of the most vulnerable. And in other words, this is really to build back better. And we really need to find a way that protects the environment, public health, and a way to safeguard people's well-being by way of those, let's say, smart policies. At the OECD, we are moving towards this objective, and our work on climate and well-being has really been making a good start. And by better capturing multiple benefits, a well-being approach to climate action can make a stronger case for implementing and funding solutions that align multiple goals and combine different scales of action. And you may actually have seen a report to this effect that we issued last year around the UN General Assembly. So we now need the determination and the political will to pursue a truly sustainable, greener recovery that is low carbon and climate resilient. And I'm sure that your discussions will help certainly generate such momentum. And I look forward to your discussions. Thank you so much, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Masamichi, and thank you for all the support and goodwill of OECD to organize this kind of event. So before moving to our topic for today, let me share with you our housekeeping rules. The first one for sure it is to keep safe. Keep safe at home, follow the lockdown rules, use your mask, clean your hands. We know that we all together, we will overpass this time of crisis. And it is true, as you have mentioned, Masamichi, that this crisis, it could be understood as a wake-up call. And it is, for sure, a wake-up call. So we are today in a Zoom for webinar, so that is why you can see just the panelists, and your mics and your cameras are off, but you can access to make some questions to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please, we will channel all the questions to the panelists, not all, probably not all, but for sure we are going to identify some specific questions for the panelists to make this very, very interactive. And you can make those questions throughout the webinar. So please feel free to ask, feel free to participate by using the Q&A question. So let me start, before of presenting and introducing the panelists, by trying to frame this discussion. And let me start by saying we are very happy because of the timing of this first dialogue in this Friday series of the WWF OECD dialogue. Why? Because many things have just happened in the current week. Let me put some examples. First, we have received a new NDC. It has been in the last days that Rwanda has put a new NDC on the table. So now what we have, it is 10 already updated NDCs. For sure, not enough for what we are expecting and aiming to raise ambition, but it is good that we are getting some, probably still too slow, but some more traction in relation to the NDC. A second news is related to what it has just happened yesterday, the formal announcement of the postponing of the incoming COP26. Now it has been defined that it will be, in November 2021. So we will have more than a year ahead to organize better that COP26 to get a strong outcome. And for me and for today's discussion, the point it is how can we give some content to the 2020? How can we still keep the idea of a super 2020 year despite of the crisis? How can we use the tools of the Paris Agreement as the NDC enhancement as a way to raise ambition, to keep momentum, and to secure good outcomes for the COP26? So it is important, and the incoming president of COP26, Alok Sharma, has already mentioned that we will raise ambition, that we will keep climate action, that we will give some content to the 2020 and the 2021 ahead before of the COP26 to secure a good outcome. But also, it has been really interesting of what it has been just announced by the Europeans, the recovery package. With this do no harm principle, the 750 billion package in which 25% it could be used for climate purposes. What does it mean, that do no harm principle? How can we make the do no harm principle a do no harm and beyond? So to build back better. So how can we secure also that this European example, it could be applied to many other countries in the world, mostly to developing countries that are facing the current consequences of the COVID-19. Also yesterday, probably you have already heard what it happened with the UN. They organized a high-level dialogue with head of state that it was called Financing for Development in the Era of COVID-19. And let me share with you the 6 conclusions in the closing remarks of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. First principle, finding ways to enhance global liquidity. Second, preventing debt crisis in all countries. Third, engaging with private creditors on. Fourth, aligning global financial with SDGs, with the Sustainable Development Goals. Fifth, ending illegal financing flows. And sixth, rebuilding differently and better. So today, in which we are going to discuss how can we green in the recovery, what we have at stake it is the NDC enhancement process, the recovery package, and a build back better. So how can we integrate those concepts for a better recovery? And also the Secretary General complement the closing remark by saying, this pandemic is showing our global fragility, and fragility could affect our multilateral efforts. And that's true. The point it is how, by using NDCs, we could overpass this situation of fragility, and how can we honor the principles and the commitment of the Paris Agreement. And let me finish this frame by saying, in the former days, I heard from a high-level representative of the EU that we do need to develop a new narrative. We should start, or we must start by recognize that we are currently facing difficulties, economic difficulties, an economic crisis, and that is going to join us probably for the next 2 years. So the point it is, how can we convince decision makers? How can we convince head of state that there are no an alternative than just to adopt climate, nature, and environmental conditions into the recovery package? How can we do that? What kind of narrative do we need to adopt to convince that head of state? So the point it is, in this narrative, what should we include? For example, labor-intensive solutions, or how much the concept of emergency could help us to build those kinds of solutions, or how can we recognize our responsibility with children and with the next generation. So what we want to do today with the panelists, it is to discuss that new narrative and how much by enhancing NDCs, we can support and help a build back better. How can we go beyond the do no harm principle? How can we overpass the crisis by keeping the long-term vision in this short-term kind of crisis? Because also that is important. How can we link our recovery with what it is the new climate economy, a 2050 vision of net zero carbon emissions? So that's the point. What is the role that NDCs could play in this recovery. So that is what we are going to discuss today. I am sure that we will listen and hear really good, innovative, and creative ideas that we will help the process for a strong enhancement of the NDCs and for a better recovery. So now let me introduce the three panelists for today. We have very good friends, very well-known people with whom I am sure we are going to have a very, very rich discussion. First, we will listen to Laurence Tubiana. She's a good friend, CEO of the European Climate Foundation, and she was one of the big engines behind the Paris Agreement that we got in 2015. I think that the first time I met Laurence, it was in Warsaw, in COP19, and we were together pushing and working towards an agreement that fortunately we got in 2015 by the Paris Agreement. After that, we will have Simon Buckle. He's head of Climate, Biodiversity, and Water Division of the OECD, also a very well-known person. It is really good to have OECD pushing and working for the adoption of climate consideration into the financial system, into the economic system, by convincing Minister of Finance. Also in a time in which, fortunately, now we have the coalition of Ministers of Finance that have adopted the Helsinki Principle and the Santiago Action Plan in the former COP25. And finally, we will be with Roberto Esmeral, also a good friend, the three of them very good friends, Vice Minister of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. As you know, Colombia is a new kid on the block on the OECD world. Colombia and Costa Rica are the new members of the OECD, what it is really good, so congratulations for them. So let me start with you, Laurence, and thank you for joining us. And let me say that unfortunately, Laurence can't be with us for the full hour or 70 minutes that we will be here in this event, because she has some other obligation. But thank you for your effort for joining us in this important event. So let me start with you, Laurence, by asking you some specific questions. So the first question to you, Laurence, it is, how can we use NDCs as a tool to greening the recovery? And how can we continue encouraging countries to fulfill with the next phase of the NDCs? 10 NDCs we know are not enough. 10 NDCs means less than 4% of what we are expecting. And we know that the former NDCs or the current NDCs could raise temperature to almost 3 degrees. And so the current NDCs are not enough. And in the new phase of the NDCs, just to have 10, it is not enough. So what kind of mechanism in this 2020 in which we won't be together, we won't have a COP26, how can we encourage the world to fulfill with the NDC? Because the NDC, it is the most important means of implementation of the Paris Agreement. So what can we do? But on the other hand, what can we do in a time in which probably the temptation is going to downsize the importance of the NDCs and the climate consideration in a time of economic crisis? So how can we convince decision makers that the NDC could be an important tool to build back better? So please, Laurence, go ahead, and thank you again. You are on mute, Laurence. Could you unmute yourself?
Thank you. And I will probably take off my camera because I'm afraid my connection is not excellent, which is a problem that I suppose a lot of you find some days. And thank you for you, Manuel, for the invitation, and for the OECD colleagues. And I think this idea of having a dialogue regularly, because the situation is so uncertain and a moving target, that we need really to catch up regularly to adjust our strategies. So I will cut my camera, so to be sure that I have the best connection that I could. Of course, why 2020 is important for the NDC? Well, just because of what you said, Manuel, is the best way. It's the tool of the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is the first year. 2020 is the first year of Paris implementation, in which country would have thought through the numbers, take into account technological improvement since 2015, then submit more ambitious commitment in line with global goals. Because of course, if we consider that Paris Agreement is about a learning process, that countries go, and not only countries, but business actors and local authorities, everyone just understand that the transition is something that it can be doable, and that is because there is a value of doing that together. The ratcheting up mechanism was key and is key to capture this learning process, this progress between countries along time, because of course the economic situation changed, the technology changed, and of course the fact that many more countries, for example, are going for renewable energy or for other type of electrification of vehicles, is of course is a way to, in a way, an input for any national strategies as well. So, but it is also the ratcheting up mechanisms, this meeting point of 2020, even with the headwinds we had, in particular the health crisis. It's about political accountability vis-a-vis the political commitments made in Paris. And this is political accountability towards civil society, towards the whole society. And it's good to see that now many actors are taking the governments accountable, they are making the governments accountable of their commitments in Paris. So for all these reasons, 2020 is a very important year. We know we are not on track. First, because a number of countries still don't make the effort necessary to even fit the modest ambitions that were presented in 2015. Second, we have to drop emissions rapidly to really have the window of opportunity to keep that for 1.5 and well below 2 degrees C. And we see that with all the crash of the economy that is happening now because of bound to the health crisis, it's not through crashing the economy that we can make progress. To reach net zero by 2050, we have to embark on structural changes on energy, transport, finance, climate resilience, for the economy to be resilient to shock and fair with all members of society. So in a way, it's not about only reducing emission because of the contraction of the economy, is to really build the right foundation for a green and resilient economy. Why then? I think that NDC is an important tool, but within a context, because understandably, all governments, all economic actors, the society, are concerned about the enormous impact of the economic and the social crisis which is looming and has already started in many countries. Take Brazil, for example, the economic and social crisis is already there. In Europe, of course, because of the social buffers, we don't see that as much, but it's coming now very, very strongly. And in the United States, you see the enormous amount of unemployment. So this is why, in my view, we should put NDC in the context of this recovery. I don't think that, and of course that's debatable, I don't think that pushing for improvement of NDC only and is the solution today, because we need to, in a way, make everyone, not only the climate specialist or the climate diplomats or the environment ministers, aware of the date of the NDC enhancement, even if it's good that some countries are really very serious about that and you put forward the list. But I do think that we need to embark all the government in a whole, and the whole government in every country is concerned about how we prevent the crisis to be too deep and how we reconstruct the economy after this shock. And so NDC should be, and it's what the strategy, the tactic and the strategy we choose for the European strategy, and in particular in the context of my foundation, is that every effort is focusing on the Green Deal as a roadmap for the green recovery. And the Green Deal is about getting net zero by 2050 in terms of carbon emissions. So in a way, my sense is that we have this year 2020, what is left. We are in a deep crisis. We should talk all together about this, the nature of the recovery. The Green Deal in the European case is a roadmap. We should offer that as an exchange of experience or potential of cooperation between countries about that. And I see some positive response from a number of countries. And then the NDCs is part of this roadmap, is a milestone for 2030 that is consistent with this green recovery and the Green Deal in the more longer term. So I must say, even if I am, of course, as you know, Manuel, we have been really working hard for this Paris Agreement. I'm still, of course, every day trying to maintain the energy behind it, but we need to position itself now in the global context, in the context of the whole economy move and the whole society move. So that's why it's good to have one more year, because we are not there. And we are not there politically for obvious reasons. I will not repeat that, it's just trivial. But we are not there because, again, all the society have to absorb what the shock is. Is the shock an opportunity to build better, as you say? And in a way, on COP26 was always going to be difficult because of the bad politics in big emitters, and there is a big list. COVID has changed the dynamic completely in a direction we don't know still where it goes. And of course, if we can just, and it's coming in the civil society, at least in many circles, that the health crisis is connected to the ecological crisis, and it's the same crisis, so that was allowed to revisit our economic system. I think then we put NDC in the best framework possible. And of course, we have to insist on the ones who can do that and deliver that in 2020. For example, I think EU can give the strong signal on improving and going to 55% by 2030, even if it takes time to do all the intricacies. But I think EU can give a very strong signal on that. But I think it's very important that this signal of these numbers, this target, is embedded in the roadmap of the Green Deal. So because we need the transition, again, and just not to be too long, I do think because of the economic and social crisis, it's a make and break moment for the climate risk. Why? Because people will be, and justifiably, opposed to the level of the social crisis and the level of unemployment for many, of course, many reasons. And so if we don't take the climate dimension, the climate policy, in the angle of how, in a way, this is a solution for recovering, for getting more jobs, for orienting the economic activity in the sense that's much more sustainable in the long term for the job and for the well-being, I think we will lose the battle. And we lose the battle for many years. So that's why we have to get it right, to take into account the public concerns, to make the choice that these are consistent choices that have to be made, and NDC is part of the vision. And so to get maybe out of our bubble on climate specialists or environment NGOs or people obsessed with climate change as I am, and talk to many other people who don't consider climate as a main issue because they are focused on the poverty issue or the health issue or the employment and job issue. So that's why I think, and many countries are in a way playing with that idea. We see that in Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, there is a lot of work going on. It's very good in a way. It's not like in 2009, it's not like we just go to the short-term response and to really bail out the banks. There is a debate in each country on what to do. And so that's a good sign. I think it's a good sign that Japan will host a Green Recovery Summit soon. You know that conversations are going on between EU and China on the roadmap. And I'm sure the OECD will participate enormously to put the Green Deal as a building block of the green recovery. And then the NDC flows naturally because we need a climate plan that make all these policy sectors, all this action together. Finally, I think we have to really show that all indicators show that green and resistance are better for public health, for sustainable profit, for human security, for the natural environment. So it needs from us really a broader framework, a broader type of advocacy and analysis and convincing. But I think that what could allow us to connect with the majority of the people around the world we want. So over. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurence. And we know that you have to leave soon, but let me make some comments on what it has been a really interesting speech. So, and to take some conclusions. The first one, it is what you put in the last part of your speech, the health. It is amazing how much health and the COVID-19 has made it possible to unite the agenda. So we used to have in the near past a very fragmented agenda, also with social crises and those kind of political crises in many countries, even in France. But now the COVID-19 is uniting the agenda around the health concept. So how, by uniting the agenda around the health concept, we can encourage countries to fulfill with the next phase of the NDC? That is the first question. The second conclusion and question, it is about the importance of keeping a long-term vision. You have mentioned the Green Deal, the European Green Deal. Also, South Korea has announced that they will do the same. Yesterday, I read something about Latin America and the concept of a Green Deal. And it's interesting how much a long-term vision could help us to move the short-term action, so in relation to NDCs. So how can we continue encouraging countries to develop their long-term strategy? A third one, you mentioned about the economic crisis, and you mentioned Brazil. But it is interesting what it happened with Chile. Before the crisis, before the COVID-19 crisis, Chile was facing a strong political and social crisis. And despite of that, plus the COVID-19, Chile has put on the table a new and enhanced NDC. So how can we use the Chilean as a model for the world? So how can we overpass the crisis situation as Chile to show our real commitment with the world with the NDC? And my fourth comment, it is about the political accountability. It is clear, Laurence, and I don't know what do you think about this, that people is losing hope in the climate process. What it is not good for sure, no? The former COPs, they have been identified as disappointing, no? So how can we recover hope in the political process? And to do that, and also to have new and enhanced NDCs, how much we should take the trajectory of some sectors as energy, for example, clean energy, and the impulse and of the non-state actors to support the formal political process. In some other way, my question it is, how can we link the formal process through COPs with the non-state actors process that include the business sector, civil society, and subnational government? That is key. And that is key for the incoming negotiations. So to link better non-state actors with formal process. Could you develop some ideas based in these questions?
Thank you, Manuel. I'll try, as you, I believe that the process, because of all these headwinds and then the postponement, and we saw when there is no political leadership, like in Madrid, and confusion, it's very, very difficult to have, even if there is really nothing to negotiate or very little. Still, of course, it's very easy to block. No bureaucracy can play its full role, and so I think. But again, if I remember Madrid, yes, the process was absolutely awful in terms of the way the different countries many countries tried to block. But outside the negotiation rooms, there was enormous vitality, as you mentioned, and the business sector and the local authorities and many elements that were not in a way in line with their own government sometimes, and of course that's the case of US, for example, or even the case of Brazil. You were seeing in the rooms around that really a very vivid system where people come to discuss what they are doing together. And so if the process wants to save itself, it's a matter to now open up and to include these actors that finally are implementing the Paris Agreement and are really want to be truthful to these goals, to play a role which is much, much more important than not just a side role, but a pretty much more central role. And in a way, it's not impossible because in a way, once we have finalized the discussion around this Article 6, which in my view are not really central, I have said that in it, and could, anyway, we could do carbon markets in many different ways. But I do think that at that stage, and because again, now the final push is really to make the government accountable to present more ambitious climate plan. And who can ask for that? Well, the society in their countries, mainly. It's not only international pressure. It's about the business in the countries, which of course have interest in having a leading country, a country more innovative, more creative, more looking forward, because that's the space that will create for them, for the sectors that want to go ahead. That's the same for the mayors that want to protect their citizens for air quality, and that wants to have the new jobs coming in. So I think we have to bet on them. I'm trustful that it can be, it's being done, by the way. It's not something we have to invent because it's quite already organized in many ways. And of course, there are really difficult questions because I saw in the chat something about the transition. You have countries, and in particular the small countries, who are so dependent on one resources. And the example of Trinidad was given on the chat. So how we accompany, how we design a transition for countries who rely on this particular resource. And I think that's a good moment for this year to really begin to think about the transition. And that's why I insist that the 2050 strategies are very important now. The recovery is the short-term, mid-term, but having the long-term view, because a number of countries, in particular the small countries depending on one particular fossil fuel resources, they have to be supported to envisage any transition. So I would bet on all this movement to get the process right. If not, it will not have a lot of sense anymore.
Thank you very much, Laurence. A virtual approach to you. And please feel free to leave the meeting or the webinar because we know that you have some other things to do. Thank you for your effort, for your commitment always, and that. Thank you very much. So thank you, friends. So let's move to the next. Thank you, Laurence. Bye-bye. So Simon, now we have Simon Buckle from OECD. Simon, I think that Laurence has framed good the conversation. So you are from OECD. OECD is this important group, 38 for today, I think, members. And it is an organization who is promoting good practices, best practices to move their members and the world toward development. So how much, when we think about NDC, how much the NDC could be a good practice, a best practice when we think about development? In a time in which, for sure, we are facing strong difficulties because of the COVID-19 crisis, in a time in which, again, the temptation it is to backslide our climate obligations, in a time in which many countries haven't started to think in the new phase of the NDCs, in a time in which the concerns have changed its focus to health, to sanitation, to water, and those kinds of things. So how can we make NDC a strong best practice? And how can we use the example of Chile, no, despite of the social and political crisis, as a best practice, mostly in developing countries? And finally, how can we export the concept of a long-term vision as a Green Deal with short-term action and the idea of do no harm? Because it is interesting, the do no harm concept. I think it is a good starting point. For me, it should be a do no harm and go beyond. Because do no harm, it is like the basic principle. But the point it is, how can we go beyond to the do no harm principle of Europe? How can we build back better with climate, nature, and environmental consideration? How can we use this concept of a New Deal for nature and people? How can we use the concept of a net zero carbon emissions world? So could you develop these ideas based in your OECD experience? Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Manuel, and hope you can hear me well, and pleasure to be here with you all. And thank you very much for the invite to speak. It's always difficult coming after Laurence, because as you say, she gives a very panoramic and strategic overview of things. But I'd start by saying that it has to be a process that is integrated into the government as well. It's not good enough to have just NDCs submitted to the UNFCCC that may or may not bear relationship to the other strategic planning processes within a country. And in a sense, the extra year that we now have gives us time to really think about how we prepare these NDCs in the context of this longer term strategy of how we recover from, you know, a huge, unprecedented, perhaps for 100 years, crisis. And if we don't, well, as Laurence said, the society is going to protest, because we get this right and we can end up with a good outcome in terms of climate, biodiversity and our well-being. We get it wrong and we're putting a huge double burden on both the current young and the next generation, both in terms of the debt that we're going to build up in terms of the emergency support and recovery, and then also the climate damages that are going to hit us increasingly from now. I mean, it's not a future issue, but it's going to get worse in the future. It's already here with us. And we've only got, 10 or 15 years perhaps to really reduce emissions to virtually zero, CO2 emissions in particular, if we're going to keep anywhere near the 1.5 goal, and a bit more for the 2 degrees. But this urgency was something that was clear beforehand. And the fact that emissions, might have gone down maybe this year by, who knows, maybe 4 to 8%, depending on what assumptions you make about deconfinement, is trivial. That's going to give us at most another year or two's time. So the urgency is still there. We cannot tackle COVID and the recovery from COVID without in ignorance of the climate and biodiversity crises we're facing. If we do, we're going to squander the opportunity, we're going to squander a lot of resources, and we're going to build in the seeds of future crises that could be a lot worse for people than we have now. So I think absolutely this is urgent. We need to use this year to really think about our recovery. And it's an opportunity. People are going to have to think about that recovery. Let's make them think about it in the context of climate and biodiversity. And then what comes out of it in terms of NDCs, to me, is nice, but it's not the essential thing. The essential thing is that the governments now have a vision of where they want to go, and the net zero by 2050 or shortly thereafterwards, depending on which countries you come from, is absolutely critical to this. We have to test all these plans against where is this going to take you after 2050? How is this measure going to contribute to a transition that's good for people, good for the climate, and good for nature? And if they can't answer that, it's not a good strategy. So that's the first test. It's these long-term, low-emission development strategies. And then we have to make the connection to the NDCs, which are the shorter-term actions. And we say shorter term, but the years keep going by, and we're now in 2020 looking at 2030 NDCs. 2050 is really not very far away. But we have to link the NDCs to the attainment of these longer term strategies, as Laurence was saying. And I think that's really important. Now, how do we do that in this unprecedented situation where debt and tax revenues, debt is ballooning, tax revenues are falling, unemployment's ballooning, asset prices are falling, oil prices are falling through the floor, emerging markets are seeing huge portfolio reversals, loss of remittances, loss of income from tourism. How do we deal with these huge economic and human crises? Because we mustn't forget about the human cost of the crisis too. And what we need to do here, well, we need this strong integrated response by the government. They need to think beyond silos, beyond little narrow sectoral interests. We need to get away a little bit as well from a fixation on GDP. We need to think about income, jobs, and housing. Those are the things that matter to people. Income, jobs, and housing. GDP is an abstract quantity that sometimes measures bad things. We shouldn't be focused on GDP as such. We should be focused on income, jobs, and housing, and then think about the quality of life, and then think about how do we assure the natural capital, the human capital, the economic capital that's going to sustain this well-being into the future. And we did a report on this, and it looks surprisingly prescient now in the wake of COVID, but we published this in September 2019, and it's called Accelerating Climate Action, Refocusing Policies Through a Well-Being Lens. And we argued there that we needed systematically to place people at the center of climate action if we were going to accelerate mitigation action and we were going to make people's lives better. And what we said in terms of the climate argument is that by integrating climate with these broader goals, income, jobs, housing, but also health, then we can overcome the barriers to change, because there's more incentive to make a change if you're hitting more positives. It also helps you to identify and to manage the barriers to change in terms of energy affordability, in terms of competitiveness, all these issues that people use as an excuse not to act. That helps you to identify them and then to target your policies to help overcome them. So we saw this as an important policy approach to supplement and be part of the NDCs. So we can't ever pursue the economic recovery and the climate change actions separately. We have to integrate them, and I think that's the key point. And so when we're taking emergency response measures now, we have to really link them to this long-term objective. We have to take advantage of some of the behavioral changes that have taken place, you know, the teleworking, the drop in surface transport, the drop in aviation, and the emissions falls that these have caused. We have to see if we can stop those going back to the same level or going beyond that. So what is it we can actually take advantage of from this? And we see some cities making some really good measures to reduce or to contain the bounce back in car traffic. We know that people will be limited in how much they can use public transport, both for personal concerns maybe about contamination, but also because, quite rightly, public authorities are limiting the density on the public transport. So what do we do? Well, we've got really innovative cities putting in place policies that will increase the ability to use bikes, electric scooters, walk safely without air pollution. This is wonderful. Can we use that as a way to a longer term vision of mobility, of accessibility, not mobility, of accessibility to opportunities to jobs for people that makes our cities more livable? So I think there are some opportunities here, and some cities are beginning to make the change. And I think this echoes Laurence's point that a lot of action can be taken by cities, by regional governments, by businesses, and in the finance sector. You mentioned this do no harm principle in the EU. I mean, in a sense, that was really from this work that they've done to develop a sustainable taxonomy, a taxonomy of sustainable activities to guide the finance sector. Now, I was involved in the technical expert group over the last couple of years, along with one of my colleagues as well. And, you know, that was a really, really interesting adventure. And it's complex, it's technical, but what it gives us is now a quite robust metric or measure to assess whether activities are going to contribute to the transition or not. And then if something's contributing on climate change, it shouldn't also be harming biodiversity or air pollution or water or circular economy objectives. And so it's a powerful concept. It's difficult perhaps for people to begin to operationalize it, but we'll get there. And the first test is, can we use that now to assess our recovery measures? So I'd say that's a really important way of measuring the effectiveness and the alignment of countries' actions with climate goals in particular. So I think perhaps I can stop there and let you come back to me if you want to, or for other speakers.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Simon. Really, you have brought many important topics for this discussion. You finished by talking about measurability and metrics. And it is true. I think that people need to follow progress, to track progress, to know exactly where are we planning to be and how are we planning to progress in that sense. And it is true that the sustainable taxonomy of Europe, it is an important tool to do that. In my case, I am a member of the evaluation council of the sovereign French bonds, green bonds. And it is interesting because the main purpose of this evaluation council, it is to secure that the investment are going to sustainable activities and are showing results. And probably that is something that it should happen also with the nature-based solutions. We do need to secure that nature-based solutions are strong solutions that are addressing a societal challenge, that are also bringing benefits to nature and benefits to people. So measurability and metrics, it is something important, and we do need to know exactly how to measure how much countries are progressing with their own NDC. And that moves me to something that I would like to ask to you. What are those elements for a NDC we want concept? What do we need to include? But also you have mentioned that we do need to connect strategies. So in a country, mostly in a developing country, the idea is trying to give coherence in between strategies. And in a time in which we're preparing recovery package, but also NDCs and long-term vision, the point is how can we glue those strategies and make it a very united strategy? Because unfortunately, the lack of resources, it could make almost impossible to have silos and different strategies working in their own when we do need to unite those strategies. Also, you mentioned something that for me is really important. If not, society is going to protest. And it is true, you know, that I am thinking, Simon, that in the past, in the near past, we used to have a fragmented agenda and some individuals at Greta as a very well-identified leader pushing the climate agenda. But probably in the near future, we will have a more united agenda because of the COVID-19 and health, and thousands of people being more demanding. So I think that this crisis is making more aware people, is creating more conscious people, that it is going to be more demanding. So how can we satisfy that demand of people that probably will walk on the streets early on the next year? And we should work beyond silos. And also that moves me to a question about governance. So, unfortunately, and this is going also to be related to Roberto, a question to Roberto, probably our old and traditional ways to organize government with ministers of the environment, when Europe now it is thinking in ecological transition bodies, no? How can we break those silos by also working on governance? So if you can, I know that I have made many questions, but if you can take 5 minutes to make some reflections about that, it would be great.
Okay, thanks very much. As ever, Manuel, full of ideas and questions, and I'll do my best, and do pick me up, or people in the audience can pick me up with questions later if I've missed important points, which I'm almost certain to do. So sorry for that in advance. So I think this idea of metrics is really important, and in the wellbeing report that we published last September, and we're working on a development of that to take account of COVID now. So we hope to publish that later in this year. What we really tried to do was to say, look, we need to take a different perspective on society. We need to have this integrated perspective, and it builds on the well-being approach that was developed at the OECD many years ago and is now being further developed. And when you say well-being to a French person, they think, oh, they mean, you know, sort of health spas and yoga. We don't. We mean really hard things, economic things like income, jobs, housing. We mean health. We're talking about people's safety. We're talking about inequality. We're talking about things that really matter to people. And what we found is that by looking at you know, traditional policy packages through this lens, we see that some climate policies might be better for well-being than others, and we want to develop metrics, therefore, or to learn from best practice of what countries and cities are already doing, because there's a lot of activity out there about what metrics, you know, help to do this. And so London has metrics about accessibility. So if a property developer wants to build some new houses, maybe that's not so likely in the near future, but then the Metropolitan Authority will assess, well, what are the transport connections? Can people living there get to jobs, to work, to hospitals, and so on? If not, maybe they ask the property developer to co-invest with them in public infrastructure. And this is a way to overcome some of the financial problems that the public authorities are going to face more and more now in the wake of COVID. So that's a nice metric. And a colleague of mine, Amy Aguiar-Jaber, has been working a lot on that when she was with the International Transport Forum. And I won't say more because I'm not an expert in the area, but it's a key indicator. There's other things that are being used in US cities about You know, the total cost for households of the housing and transport put together, you know, you might have cheap houses, but they might be miles from your job or from the city centre where you go shopping. And the total costs might be far higher than people realise. So a focus on inequality might lead you to different designs of cities than otherwise. Designing green spaces into cities, that's really important. So all these things can be captured in metrics, and we've listed quite a lot in our book. In terms of how do you do this, you definitely need cross-government effort, and we've just been working with one OECD member, Israel, basically to support their thinking about the possibility of creating a long-term low-emission strategy for Israel. And it's been really, really interesting to do that, because it's a country that isn't necessarily thinking that it's contributing much in terms of emissions. So why do they want to have a low emission strategy? It's a small country. And my answer basically was, look, the whole world is going to have to get to net zero. If you're not part of that, how are you going to sell all your innovative high-tech goods overseas to countries who might want smart solutions for electricity grids or whatever it is that Israel at that point is producing? And they are a very, very smart industrial nation. So how are you going to persuade people to buy your stuff if you don't even put it in place in your own country? And this is, again, comes back to this collective responsibility that we've seen post-crisis. You know, you can't protect against a pandemic by action in one country. If you have cases in country X, all the other countries in the world are potentially exposed to that because of the transport, trade, and other connections that we have. So we can get a long way by just getting people to think about the strategy, and then you start thinking through, well, what does this mean for the sector? And then actually, you can't think about the transport sector without thinking about the building sector. And so you start getting the two ministries talking, and then you develop indicators where they both have to contribute if they're going to achieve the indicator. And that then forces them to work together. So it's that sort of approach that I think is needed. I'll perhaps leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you again, Simon, and also a virtual applause to you. Thank you for joining, and also thank you to OECD to join this effort with WWF for this dialogue series. So now let's move to our last panelist, a very good friend, Roberto Esmeral, from a beautiful land, the land of my mother, Colombia. My mother was Colombian, from Bogota. So it is nice to have you here, Roberto. You are the new kid on the block in sense of country as part of the OECD. So I have many questions to you that probably are going to be more related to what a developing country is used to facing in this time. So what, in your point of view, are those barriers that can make more difficult to address the new phase of the NDCs or to enhance the NDC itself? How are you planning to include adaptation measures? Because NDCs, it is not just about mitigation, it is also about adaptation. And also, how can you recognize as a country the rights of indigenous people, the traditional knowledge, human rights itself, as part of that NDC? And Simon has just mentioned inequalities. No, I think that this COVID has made emerge strongly, arise the inequalities, that it is related to the vulnerability of people, lack of access to water, migrants, South migrants, no, that are not receiving any benefit of any recovery package of any government, because governments don't know exactly where they are. Problems with access to internet in a time in which we are developing new ways to promote education, health, medicine, no? Without access to internet, we are just going deeply into discrimination. So Colombia, developing country, new member of the OECD, how are you planning, and also a mega diverse country? Simon mentioned the connection between nature and climate. So how much we can link nature with climate in the NDC. So please, we have 15 minutes until the end of this first webinar. So please, Roberto, go ahead.
Well, first, thanks, Manuel, for this invitation. To talk about these important issues. Well, let me begin saying that this is not an opportunity. This is a must-do. We have to align the NDCs and the 25th Street strategies to this post-COVID society and the new reality of national economies. Some of the actions that are now in our current NDCs can be implemented, but will be affected with this new reality. For example, among others, Simon talked about the transport. When we think about massive public transport, we need to rethink this massive transport. We need to begin to think about to apply crisis protocols or the way that these systems are developed. We need to reinforce non-motorized transport alternative. We need to encourage teleworking to reduce emissions related to transport too. And we are talking when we are talking about teleworking, we are talking about technologies of information and communication that will play an important role in reducing emissions now on. Talking about energy, well, right now, because the quarantine, we have a decrease in the demand of electricity, almost 13%. But at the same time, people in households are consuming more energy and more water. So we have to continue investing in diversification of the energy matrix in non-renewable energy, but we have to work with people in their mindsets in order that they can optimize the use of natural resources and services while we are continue working in energy efficiency. This new scenario or reality generate the opportunity to review and redirect activities towards a more sustainable future. And not only business, not only local, regional, and national governments will play a role. Communities could play a key role in these goals. I've been climate change and sustainable development lecturer for more than 10 years, and I'm always trying to teach to my students that the power of the markets relied of them. If we begin to consume in a more responsible way, if we demand new products, knowing the impact of the environment of each one of our actions, then we will be closer to sustainable future. Of course, after this COVID problem or crisis that we are facing, many sectors are being affected due to the isolation. So we have to continue working together with them in order to identify actions that are going to be affected or needs to be reshaped. The World Q&A's NDCs has been developed already with this sector, so this has helped to considerably reduce the political and social barriers. But of course, the NDC schedule is being affected by the health emergency in the following aspects. For example, it's not possible to hold face-to-face territorial or sectoral workshop as we planned. And this is important because in our strategy, we need to go to different territories with different problems, with different solutions, with different approach to fight against climate change in order to sit in the same place, business, industries, local and regional governments, and communities. So in this way, we can pave a more sustainable solution to climate change, identifying that solutions in each territory is different. So we need to improve the way that we are going to approach these people by distance, involvement of participants, the approaching technologies. As we expected, some sectors, institutions, for some sector and institutions, climate change is not one of the main issues right now. They are attending health emergencies, trying to maintain markets, trying to support employees and their families. And we as national government, we are doing a strong effort to help all sectors and institutions too. So on the other hand, this COVID-19 crisis alters the projections and economic growth considerably. So we need to, when we are forced to reevaluate the projections used in the reference scenarios and in the mitigation scenarios too, because, and this causes a normal delay in the modeling of the NDCs. Of course, we will have to put more efforts to discuss and to convince sectors more affected by COVID-19 in order to have greater ambitions. We will face a lot of barriers, but as you know, well, our national development plan led by Presidente Duque was aligned with the SDG, was aligned with a long-term vision, and we are working to leave behind the silos, to integrate sectors. For example, we are delivering sustainable policies related to clean air or sustainable transport, and we were preparing them not as a silo, just as a team, people of Ministry of Transport, Health, Energy, and Environment working together, well, to deliver these sustainable policies. Of course, adaptations will be a key role to us. As you know, in the first NDC we prepared, we set some goals related to adaptation. And we are reviewing and improving inventories, building a draft diagnosis on adaptation goals, and preparing the first national adaptation communication. We are working in NDCs on the basis that we are not going to reduce the goal, that we are going to integrate more governance, regions, communities in order to build a stronger, more sustainable NDCs. Of course, this is the basis for a sustainable development for Colombia and the regions. And in this year of biodiversity, of course, we need to improve more in the inclusion of health and nature-based solution in our plans.
Thank you, Roberto. And let me remind to you all that the next dialogue, next June the 5th, it will be about nature-based solutions, a really important point, a really important topic to be discussed when we think about greening the recovery. So let me make a couple of questions to you, Roberto, probably a very political question. I used to be Minister of the Environment in Peru from 2011 to 2016. And we do know that in developing countries, the Ministry of the Environment are probably the tiny piece, no, of a biggest machinery. So, and probably it is even more difficult in this time of COVID-19. And you have talked about breakout silos. And so how can we do that? Or how can you are planning to do that as Vice Minister of the Environment of Colombia? And also let me say something that I mentioned in my opening, that we know that there is a coalition of Ministers of Finance that adopted the Helsinki Principle and the Santiago Action Plan. I don't remember if Colombia is part of that coalition, probably yes. So how can we push and encourage Minister of Finance to fulfill with what they have adopted as the Helsinki Principle and the Santiago Action Plan, to show and to reflect that their commitment, it is beyond the paper, is that it is a real commitment and they are going to greening strongly the recovery. But my last question, that probably is the more difficult one. I heard, Roberto, that in Colombia, a group of members of the business sector have asked the Colombian government to relax environmental regulation because of the crisis. How are you planning to avoid that temptation of relaxation of environmental regulation and switch it into what we are expecting, that it is to enhance NDCs? So if you can answer it in 4 or 5 minutes, that would be great, because we are close to end the session.
Thanks for the question, Manuel. The first one, well, I would like to remember always that we are the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. So that gives us an opportunity to work with all other sector and ministries, paving the future and thinking the sustainable future that all we want. So in that order ideas, one of the main issues that's easy the way to us is that, well, the position of Presidente Duque, that since the first time he wanted to align the National Development Plan with the SDGs and all the post-2015 the development agenda. So in that order of ideas, no matter COVID, we are aligned with that, and we have been thinking in the long term since the beginning of this government. So under his management, we have the mandate to work as teams and not silos. And that order of idea, we are always in the discussion related to other sectors: transports, energy, waste, housing. So that open us the door to continue discussing us that important issues, not only to climate change, to biodiversity. We, of course, we have a lot of goals between all ministries. For example, to tell you an example, related to the increase of non-renewable conventional energy, it's not only a goal of the Ministry of Energy, it's a goal of mine too. So we are included, we have goals for all the government, not for silos or not for each one of the ministry. Of course, we have to work in other issues related to our functions. Related to the second question that of the Ministry of Finance, we continue working and we have a close relationship with the Ministry of Finance. As you know, for example, we have a carbon tax that we developed with them, and we are, well, all time working about incentive for cleaner fuels or cleaner technologies. So we work together as a team, and of course resources are limited and we have to push every time and every decision, but we are now in an important position, and I guess the President gave us, as Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, a role to play to be able to deliver a sustainable future. Of course, there is a lot of people looking for, or businesses or some industries looking or telling us to relax environmental regulations, but we cannot for the short term. We have goals in the medium and long term. So we're trying to and the government has been creating solutions in order to promote or to ease the way that this kind of company will recover without relaxing environmental regulation. We have a commitment with environment and with communities, and we are going to maintain these regulations, well, to be able, as I said before, to deliver a sustainable future for all the regions, all the communities, and indigenous people. It's a challenge, but well, we are here to work in that idea.
Thank you, Roberto. So we have just 3 minutes. So let me make a couple of questions. One to you, Simon. The second to you, Roberto. But if you can answer in a minute. So Duska Dimovic, it is asking, and this is to you, Simon, how do we make sure that NDCs integrate private sector players and subnational actors as vectors of change in the post-COVID climate action? And for you, Roberto, after Simon, who keeps governments accountable? It is mainly NGOs. It is a question from Alberto Alba Argaiz. So please, Simon, if you can do it in a minute to respect the time of all our participants, go ahead.
Oh, that's an easy question, or 2 easy questions for a minute. So NDCs, absolutely, with strategies as well. There needs to be a process of engagement with society, with civil society, with business, to really create the vision and the shared understanding of what's required. And I think that consultation, that engagement process is something that, when it's done well, strengthens these plans, and that maybe is also something that can be done in the coming year for the new NDCs. And then in terms of who keeps governments accountable, well, it's a lot of different people. It's voters, for one thing, where we have elections. That really is a very direct mechanism. It's terms of social protests. It's the media, and you know, there's problems about silos in the media. but it's also the financial markets, and we need there to increase the financial markets' understanding of the risks that they face if they continue to invest and fund projects that undermine longer-term sustainability. Okay, they might be all right for a year or two, but as we've seen with COVID, you can get quite big adjustments and shocks coming out of the blue, and that's what we're likely to see with climate if we don't address the problem. And of course, we have a number of mechanisms within the OECD, one of which is the multinational guidelines, enterprise guidelines, which has an environment chapter that can begin to address some of these climate change issues. And there's a grievance mechanism under that. There's a national contact point, and you can address complaints to that contact point about behavior by firms. And that's one very direct way that action can be taken. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. And now you, Roberto.
Well, thank you, Manuel, for that question. Well, in this time of technology, of information and communications and open data, well, government itself is accountable. People, the Congress, NGOs, well, we are communities, universities, well, we're open. We are always receiving information, studies, and people is always asking us if we are going to comply well with our goals. One of our main or ideas when we come to the government is to take out all the policies out of Bogota, go to the territories, understanding that different solution policies are required for different kind of people and territories and communities. So right now, and as you notice, well, we are always having dialogues with people, with communities, and with NGOs. So, and I guess to be aligned to the SDG give us well the power to create and convene with people a better future.
Thank you, friends. And let me take a couple of more minutes, sorry to the participant, because we do want to respect your time, but this is a really interesting question from Elena Soroliu. So just in a word, please, Simon and Roberto, what is the major threat to climate action in the post-COVID recovery? One word, what is that for you the main threat? First Simon, then Roberto.
Just immediate responses and not thinking through what this means in the longer term.
Thank you, Simon. Roberto?
For me, it's actions from governments, peoples, but we need to act now.
Good. Thank you, friends. Let me say that I have enjoyed a lot this discussion. And very difficult to wrap up because we are running out of time, but let me share with you some last reflections. I think that the message is clear. We have to embed NDCs into our recovery plans because it is part of, but that is not going to be an easy work. It is not going to be easy to do that because it is clear that this COVID-19, it has made arise new concerns of people. You mentioned, Simon, income, jobs, housing, and now health. So we must be very smart in linking the NDCs with people expectations. That is a real important thing. And to do that, we do need to break out silos. We do need to recover hope and to show to the people that there is some trajectory. Things are happening in sense of energy. Things are happening in relation to nature-based solutions. We can really get and recover that hope, not only by working in the formal process of COP, because this is beyond COP, but also working with the non-state actors, with the subnational government, with the civil society, with the indigenous people, because we are all together in the same. But to do that also, we do need to define clearly the long-term vision, because people need to know where are we going to. people need to have that hope that, okay, we know what is that country, that region, that world that we are expecting by 2030 or by 2050. So concept of Green Deal, whatever it could be the name, but a long-term vision, it is a key element to do that. And we should make our effort by recognizing the reality. It is not that we are going to deny the reality. The reality is that we are going to face a social, political, economic crisis because of this pandemic for the year ahead and probably for the next year or one more year. So we don't know exactly when we are going to be ready to continue our efforts. So we should start by recognizing that, and we should develop that narrative that the people is expecting to be convinced. No, that narrative is really important. How are we planning to convince actors to adopt climate considerations and nature considerations into this recovery? It is really important to have a clear narrative. It is not just to mention the importance of, it is to convince people by showing what it could mean to do it the opposite. So those kind of things are really key when we think about the NDC. And also we do need to track progress, because it is not just about to put any NDC on the table. The idea is to have real and strong enhanced NDCs. So it is interesting what it has just happened with Japan. There were a lot of resistance of what Japan put on the table some weeks ago. But fortunately, in the Petersburg Dialogue, Japan has announced that they are working in their NDC and that they are planning to put an enhanced NDC by 2021. And in that sense, the accountability of countries, and also because of the insistence of NGOs, people, citizen groups, business sector, it is really, really important, because it is not just about to put anything on the table. We do need to have enhanced NDCs because, and this is my last reflection, because the climate emergency is bigger than the COVID-19 emergency. And we don't need to recognize that. But unfortunately, we used to just put the title of climate emergency, but now we do know what does it mean to act accordingly to an emergency. So we have to use this example of what does it mean an emergency to develop tools to make the climate emergency a reality of clear and strong action. That is for me a key element. Fortunately, we are here all together working towards the same. It is not going to be easy. I remember that I wrote an article just after the COP25 saying that it's going to be difficult because this is like the last rice that resists to be detached from the pot when you are cleaning up, no? So there are going to be some resistance for sure, but we do need to insist. So thank you very much to you all. Thank you very much to our participants. Thank you to OECD and WWF. I am sure that you have enjoyed this seminar, this dialogue, and join us for the next one. The next one is going to be as interesting as this one. It's going to be about nature-based solutions. And remember that nature-based solutions, it is an evolving concept that it is getting political and social traction. But nature-based solutions doesn't mean everything. It means some specific solutions to address some specific societal challenge that can create co-benefits to people, to well-being, to biodiversity. So we are going to discuss that on June the 5th, the Day of the Environment. Again, keep safe, take care, and see you on June the 5th in this Friday series dialogue with WWF OECD. Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend. Keep safe. Bye-bye.